Okay, so let's clear some things up because there is a lot of misinformation going around about the Middle East. The word Palestine means kingdom. It is derived from Palestina, which is Latin, and essentially the root was palladium, which means palace. The Romans decided to rename Israel and Judea and essentially what became Greater Syria during the Ottoman Empire, Syria Palestina, which would translate to the Kingdom of Assyria. They did this because they would have known about the previous Assyrian empires that stretched across the Levant in the areas where Judea and Israel were, and they wanted to pay homage to those previous empires because they admired them and all that they did, and they wanted to be like them. So, like many empires throughout history, the Roman Empire had a smaller kingdom in the area of Judea and Israel. And so King Herod had to report back to Rome and was not completely autonomous. So it was a kingdom within an empire. And so Syria Palestina, the kingdom of Syria, was a kingdom within the empire of Rome. Thus, today we have Palestine and Syria, and they got their names that way from Syria Palestina being named by the Romans. Herodotus also used a variation of this term earlier. He was using the Greek spelling of the Latin term because the Romans and the Greeks would have interacted with each other. They borrowed terms from each other, and language developed that way. We can infer this mainly because the Greek term for palace is definitely not palladium, so we don't see the root being the same there in the two languages. But yes, to sum up, palladium means palace, therefore Palestina means kingdom because it's getting its meaning from that root. Therefore, Palestine is an anglicized word of Palestina. And there's a Greek variation that was used by Herodotus in the 5th century BC, which is the first recorded record that we can find. There's probably other records and usages going back and forth. And eventually, after the Romans changed Judea and Israel officially into Syria Palestina, as the term developed and became more and more used, that area became occupied and colonized by multiple different groups over the centuries. It most recently was taken over by the Ottoman Empire before it was freed and turned into the Palestinian Mandate. So under the Ottoman Empire, the area was known as Greater Syria. Palestine didn't exactly exist. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, Palestine this in 1800, blah, 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 but it would have been known as Southern Syria, or just the whole area would have been called Greater Syria. And then when the Ottoman Empire fell and they were able to free the area from the Turks, they had to decide what to do and what to call the area. And they weren't quite sure, and there was a bit of a debate as to whether to keep everything Syria or to split it up, because there were some issues about what was going on in what is now Israel and Palestine, and what is Syria, because the Syrians of today have a certain identity and culture and history, and obviously Palestinians have certain things going on, and Israel has certain things going on. And so when Greater Syria tried to figure out what was going on, they decided that they wanted the international community in Greater Syria decided that they wanted to create Palestine out of the old name Syria Palestina. They said, well, it's historic to have this name, so let's use that because it's also associated with Greater Palestine for reasons. And so they did that because they're like, it's associated, but it's not the same as us, and so it's a compromise, and they kind of created history out of something that wasn't even necessarily there. It became very confusing and misleading the way they ended up doing things. And then all sorts of misinformation and weird conspiracy theories cropped up on the internet. Things like the Philistines being related to the word Palestine because of the way you pronounce it in Arabic. What is it? Palestine is the Arabic pronunciation for Palestine. And I will tell you right now, no. The Palestinians and the Philistines are, the Philistines are the same. But the Philistines are a Greek sea people who settled in what is now Gaza way back in ancient times, and they were extinct at least 200 years before the Romans replaced Israel and Judea, they replaced the name with Syria Palestina. By that time, the Philistines had been extinct for 200 years. So there was absolutely no reason to insult Jews and separate them from their history by calling the land anything to do with the Philistines. And it's some sort of whack job conspiracy theory. And the so-called scholars who may offer some sort of proof that there's a connection, the only thing they're really able to say is that the two words Palaset, which is the official name for the area, which is now Gaza, where the Philistines lived, sounds similar to Palestine, but there's no real etymology documents that prove any of this. And in fact, the word Philistine, Palasht, which is the Egyptian version, I believe, and there's something similar in Hebrew, and there's all these cognates, variations. They are supposedly, as far as we know, derived from the Hebrew word or some sort of Semitic root that means invader, because again, they were Greek sea people, as far as we know. So Palash is the root of Philistine, which is the English, the final cognate that we use today for these people. And I don't think anyone really wants to choose to call themselves an invader. So if they understood the history of the word, the etymology, as you call it, I don't think they would be saying what they try to say. But there are some propaganda videos out there claiming that Palestinians are indigenous because they're Philistines, which makes no sense. And I wanted to try and clarify that. There might be some ancestry that establishes some indigenous, heritage. The genetics of the Palestinian people is very mixed. I think studies reveal some Saudi Arabian DNA, some Persian DNA, some Kurdish DNA. There might actually be some Greek DNA there, but it's definitely not Philistine. It's because the Philistines were related closely to the Mycenaeans and the Minoans. like I said, the Levant, the area from the northern border of Egypt, where the Sinai was, to all the way up to Phoenicia, where Lebanon is now, and the Levant would include parts of Syria. That area was, occupied and colonized multiple times throughout history in, the last 4,000 years. And there were empires and whatnot. And so the people there have a very mixed ancestry. So everybody has multiple sources when it comes to their background. The people that live there, both Jews and Muslims, and there are Druze there. There are Indians, I think, as well. It's actually an extremely diverse country for how small it is, and it's unique in the fact that it's a democracy as well. I love Israel, and I've also been to the West Bank because I went to the Dead Sea, and I enjoyed that as well. Obviously, that has its problems politically, but yeah, it's just, people say things like Israel doesn't exist or Palestine doesn't exist, and neither really makes sense, and I don't think it's solving anybody's problems. And when I hear nonsense about how, these conspiracy theories or propaganda, like the Philistines are gone. They were gone 200 years before Syria, Palestina got its official name from the Romans, and nobody was trying to separate the Jews from their history and their culture and their land. At least not until recent times, when the Muslims and the Jews stopped getting along, right before the mandate was created. That it became a very hard time for the people of Greater Syria right before the Ottoman Empire fell. They were very fed up about being occupied, and they did not like the Turks. They did not like being controlled. They did not like the lack of autonomy, and so it was very hard for them. And then they stopped being able to get along with their Jewish neighbors, and this happened well before 1948. I believe I went to some sites when I was in Israel about where certain things happened and people got killed in the early 1900s. So this was before they even created the mandate. And then they ended up having to split the mandate, Palestine, as they chose to call it, because they didn't keep Greater Syria together, and they broke it into Syria and Palestine instead, because Greater Syria and Syria Palestina is essentially the same thing, was what I was trying to talk about with the etymology and the history, is that, they couldn't get along. And so the idea was to come up with a two-state solution. So they created essentially two theocracies, except for there's doublespeak here, and Israel's like, but we're a democracy, and we do have the short list, which is all Arab Muslims, and they represent, the minority, the large minority of people who are supposed to also have a voice. But it is kind of a theocracy, even though it's a democracy, and there isn't an apartheid per se, but they do want to make sure that Jews have a right to do what they want to do, because they feel like they weren't allowed to have self-governance and self-determination in the past. So they're fighting, the idea that in the past, they felt like they were being erased, or people were trying to erase them. They were trying to erase their identity. They were trying to erase their right to exist or their right to be themselves multiple times, in multiple contexts. And so they're fighting for their right to exist and their right to be them. And this sometimes comes off as, I don't want you to be able to be you, because if you're allowed to be you, then I can't be me. And I don't think they always do that to the degree that people accuse them of. So I don't think it's an apartheid state. But I also try and look at things from other people's point of view, and I kind of get where people get that impression sometimes, especially because there are some bad behaviors that go on. I know one soldier at one point was bragging about shooting rubber bullets at kids for fun, and that's obviously not a good idea, right? Yeah, and then one person one time implied that I might not be Jewish because when I had my own DNA done, I found out I had Persian DNA, and I also found out I had twice as much Middle Eastern DNA than I had expected based on my background. Because there are statistics about how much DNA each Jew ethnically should have, and one of my parents was a convert, so I thought I should have had half as much as I ended up having. And one person I was talking about, because I got excited because I'm like, I have a connection to the Middle East, because that's obviously very important to Jewish people, because our faith and our history and our national identity is all tied together. So you know, Middle Eastern DNA is like, wow, great, awesome, proof. And this person like made this comment about someone who was adopted and found out that they, or not adopted, but in vitro fertilization, and found out that they weren't even Jewish. And I was just like, they suggested I read the book, and I'm like, you're implying that I might not be Jewish either. I'm like, I know how to pick up on these cues. And so I sent her an email the next day about the mountain Jews, and because I figured she might not have heard of them, because I hadn't until I had done my DNA and found out I'm probably one of them, or at least partially one of them. But yeah, I just wanted to discuss all this stuff because it can be maddening sometimes, especially with the conspiracy theories and the misinformation and the immature jokes about people trying to take cheap shots, and you know, just there are a lot of innocent people dying, or people who aren't necessarily completely innocent but still don't deserve to suffer, and especially not as much as they do. And I'll end with, I really hope that they bring the rest of the hostages home, and I hope that they do, you know, have a permanent ceasefire as soon as possible, and we figure out how to work things out and live in peace. Because I've met some really nice Muslims and some nice Arab people, and you know, I'm Jewish. That's always going to be my identity. And you know, I think Jewish people are very smart, and they can be very kind and compassionate, but they can also be very ignorant about what the other side goes through, and it's sad.